I am a 32-year-old woman named Maya, and the day I found out my brother transferred our inherited land to the wife of my brother was the day my trust and blood ties cracked without warning. Because I was standing in the county records office with a thin folder in my hands, reading my name missing from the deed like it had never existed, and my heart started pounding as memories rushed in of our father teaching us to walk the boundaries of that land, telling us it was meant to protect us both. Yet here I was realizing protection had turned into betrayal through paperwork and silence. And I felt the heat rise in my face as I replayed every conversation where my brother Aaron smiled and told me not to worry, that everything was handled, while I struggled to cover rent and medical bills thinking my share was safe. And as I drove home gripping the steering wheel, my thoughts raced through every sign I ignored. The way the wife of my brother Linda suddenly talked about future plans, the renovations, the farm vision, all spoken as if I was a guest and not an heir. And I remembered my own personality in contrast, cautious, loyal, raised to believe fairness mattered more than comfort. Now sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at the copy of the transfer document, feeling manipulated, not just financially but emotionally, because the land was more than money. It was proof that my place in the family mattered, and realizing someone decided I mattered less without asking, and the moral weight hit me hard as I wondered whether family loyalty should ever excuse a quiet theft. Done with smiles and legal stamps, and the tension tightened when my phone buzzed with a message from Aaron saying we should talk later, casual and calm, as if my world was not tilting, and I could hear his voice in my head, already framing excuses. Marriage obligations, advice from others, claiming it was temporary or strategic. While I knew the law does not care about intention once ink dries. And I felt torn between confronting him directly or seeking legal advice first, between protecting peace or protecting myself. Because any move I made would ripple through holidays, parents' memories, and every shared childhood moment. And as evening fell, I drove past the land itself, stopping at the rusted gate, watching the sun drop behind the trees. Growing up, I always believed my brother Aaron and I were built from the same sense of fairness. Yet looking back, I can see how differently life shaped us. Because while I stayed close to home, working as an administrative coordinator at a small medical clinic and helping our parents through illness and paperwork, Aaron chased opportunity, moving faster and dreaming bigger, and when he married Linda, I tried to welcome her genuinely, even though something in her ambition felt sharper than mine and our family. Dynamics quietly shifted as holidays became more formal, conversations more careful, and decisions less shared. And I noticed how our mother often praised Aaron for being decisive while reminding me to be patient. A word that slowly turned into a warning rather than comfort. And professionally, I was known as reliable and calm, the person coworkers trusted with sensitive tasks. Yet that same habit of trust followed me home, where I assumed family agreements carried the same weight as written ones, and my closest friend Nadia once warned me that loyalty without boundaries invites loss, but I brushed it off. Because I believed inherited land carried a moral promise that could not be bent. And reflecting now, I see the early signs, like when Aaron handled all legal documents after our father passed, telling me it was easier that way, or when Linda casually asked whether I planned to move far someday, questions that felt harmless until they were not. And I recognize my own mistake of avoiding confrontation because I valued peace more than clarity, a flaw rooted in years of watching arguments tear other families apart, and the resentment I feel now is tangled with love because Aaron was the brother who helped me study for exams and drove me to job interviews. Yet he also became the man who decided my consent was optional. And as I think about colleagues at work who fight for credit and recognition, I realize how favoritism operates quietly everywhere, rewarding confidence while sidelining caution. And I wonder whether this conflict truly began with land or with years of unspoken imbalance. And the tension deepens when I remember a conversation with Linda where she spoke about security and legacy with a certainty that excluded me, making me feel like a temporary chapter in a story already written, and I cannot ignore the possibility that more decisions were made without my knowledge, that accounts or boundaries or plans exist beyond what I have seen. And this awareness creates a low hum of suspense in my daily life as every phone call feels loaded and every family gathering feels staged. Because the next dilemma may not be about property alone, but about whether I am willing to challenge the roles assigned to me. And as I sit with these reflections, I sense that loyalty, ambition, and silence are circling toward another test that may demand a choice I am not yet ready to make.
The first real turning point came when I finally agreed to meet Aaron at a quiet coffee shop near his office. A place chosen carefully for neutral ground. And as I watched him stir his drink without meeting my eyes, I felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing into my chest. Because before I could even bring up the land, he began explaining how complicated things had become since marriage. How responsibilities change. How advice from lawyers and relatives pushed him to act quickly. And in that moment, I realized this was not a mistake, but a decision made long before I ever questioned it. And my doubt crept in as I asked myself whether I had been naive to trust verbal promises over legal clarity. Yet my emotions surged when he admitted that transferring the inherited land to his wife felt safer for his future. A word that echoed painfully because it excluded mine. And I sat there torn between anger and disbelief, struggling to balance the love I still felt for my brother with the reality that he undermined me quietly and efficiently. And the pressure intensified when he suggested I would still benefit indirectly someday, framing loss as patience, which felt like manipulation wrapped in reassurance. And as I drove back to work, my phone filled with messages from relatives, hinting that I should keep family matters private, reminding me how conflict reflects poorly on everyone, adding an external force that pushed me toward silence. While at the clinic, my supervisor casually mentioned how important it is to advocate for yourself before systems lock you out. Words that felt too precise to ignore. And internally, I wrestled with fear of being labeled difficult against the risk of becoming invisible. Because challenging my brother meant risking family harmony and possibly financial stability. Yet, accepting his choice meant surrendering my agency and confirming that my role was secondary. And the anxiety followed me into the night as I reread old emails and memories, searching for proof that I had been included once. And the betrayal deepened when I discovered through public records that the transfer was done months earlier, meaning every reassurance since then had been a performance. And that knowledge shifted my doubt into resolve mixed with grief, because the brother I trusted had chosen secrecy over honesty. And the moral dilemma sharpened as I considered my options: confront him publicly or pursue legal counsel, quietly protect the family image or protect my future. And the tension remained unresolved as a letter arrived the next morning from a legal office, requesting my acknowledgement of the transfer. A formal request that demanded a response, leaving me staring at the page, knowing that whatever choice I made next would define not only the fate of the land, but the truth of who I was willing to become.
The escalation began the moment I chose not to sign the acknowledgement letter, because silence itself became a statement that rippled outward faster than I expected. And within days, Aaron stopped calling while Linda started reaching out through polite but pointed messages that framed my hesitation as emotional instability, suggesting mediation while quietly reminding me how legal timelines work. And I felt pressure tightening from every direction as relatives hinted that I was overreacting. Coworkers noticed my distraction, and my bank account reminded me how much that land could have changed my future security. And ethically, I felt trapped between protecting myself and being painted as the sister who tore the family apart. Because each step forward carried consequences that felt heavier than the last. And the manipulation became clearer when Aaron told our mother that I was confused about the inheritance. planting doubt before I ever spoke for myself, and hearing her voice shake on the phone asking why I could not just trust him cut deeper than any document. Yet I also learned that the land was being positioned as collateral for a business loan, raising the financial stakes from inheritance to irreversible loss. And my uncertainty grew as a local attorney warned me that waiting too long could weaken my claim, while acting too fast could ignite a public dispute that would stain every relationship I had. And emotionally, I felt stretched thin, sleeping lightly, replaying conversations, questioning whether standing up for fairness was worth the cost of isolation. And the drama intensified when a distant cousin contacted me quietly to say that similar transfers had happened before in the family. Always justified, never reversed, revealing a pattern that made my situation feel less personal and more systemic. And that knowledge fueled both anger and fear as I realized I was facing not just my brother but a culture of quiet exclusion. And the pace of events quickened when Linda invited me to dinner under the promise of resolution. A setting that felt like a negotiation disguised as warmth. And I agreed, despite my instincts, because refusing felt like surrender. And as I prepared for that night, I gathered documents, notes, and questions, knowing that every word spoken could be used to define me as cooperative or combative. And the suspense peaked as I arrived at their home to find an unfamiliar man already seated at the table, introduced as an advisor, his presence signaling that this was no longer a family discussion but a strategic confrontation. And as I took my seat feeling my pulse race, I understood that whatever happened next would either reclaim my voice or erase it completely, leaving me staring across the table wondering which version of myself would walk away when the night ended. The twist revealed itself not through confrontation but through coincidence. Because 2 days after that dinner, I received an email meant for someone else, forwarded accidentally by the advisor who had sat at the table. And as I read it slowly, my hands began to shake when I realized it contained an earlier draft of the land transfer plan dated before our father even passed, outlining a strategy where the inherited land would be moved into Linda's name to shield it from potential sibling claims. And the shock hit me in waves as I understood that the narrative of urgency and marital responsibility had been constructed long before grief blurred our judgment, and my disbelief turned heavy when I saw Aaron's name approving the plan in writing, calm and deliberate, which reframed every memory of reassurance as calculated patience. And emotionally, I felt a hollow stillness rather than rage, because the betrayal was no longer impulsive but intentional. And that clarity stripped away my doubt while deepening my disappointment. And as I sat alone rereading the email, I remembered moments that now felt staged. The careful kindness, the delays, the way questions were redirected, all aligning into a truth that was impossible to unsee. And yet the suspense remained because the email also hinted at another layer, referencing an unsigned amendment that acknowledged my equal inheritance but marked it as contingent on my consent. A consent that was never sought, and this revelation stirred a new resolve as I realized the system that excluded me also documented my relevance. And the emotional impact was sharp as I weighed the power of this knowledge against the cost of using it. Because exposing the plan would not just confront Aaron but unravel a web of family decisions that thrived on silence. And my reaction shifted from shock to controlled focus as I began to understand that the story I was told was designed to exhaust me into compliance. And that realization felt like reclaiming oxygen after being underwater. Yet the tension stayed unresolved because the email was not a contract, only evidence of intent, and intent alone does not guarantee justice. And as I considered my next move, my phone rang with a message from Linda asking whether I had found peace yet. A question that now felt ironic and loaded, and I did not respond because I knew the balance had shifted quietly. And as night settled, I saved the email in multiple places, aware that possession of truth does not equal victory, but it does change who holds leverage. And the suspense lingered as I faced the choice of revealing what I knew or waiting for the right moment, understanding that timing could determine whether this truth protected me or provoked a retaliation. I was not prepared to face leaving me awake and alert to the reality that the game had been rigged early, but the ending was still unwritten. The decision came faster than I expected, yet felt heavier than anything before. Because after days of rehearsing conversations, and as I signed the authorization, my hands steadied in a way my heart had not for weeks. Because choosing action over avoidance clarified who I was becoming. And the consequences followed almost immediately when Aaron called, furious and hurt, accusing me of betrayal and escalation, while Linda shifted from politeness to warning, reminding me how legal fights drain time and money, and I absorbed both reactions with a mix of grief and resolve, understanding that defending my inheritance meant accepting their anger as the price of self-respect. And financially, the risk became real as legal fees loomed and my savings thinned, forcing me to cut back and lean on friends who offered quiet support rather than advice. And emotionally, the cost surfaced during family gatherings that turned distant or canceled, leaving empty spaces where familiarity once lived. Yet there was also a strange relief in no longer pretending. And the moral satisfaction of knowing I had not enabled a pattern of exclusion balanced the sadness of losing the version of my brother I thought I had, and the legal process moved slowly, grounded in reality rather than dramatic victory, with negotiations proposed and timelines set that promised no instant resolution. But as weeks passed, I noticed a shift in how others approached me, more careful, more honest, as if my willingness to stand firm reset the boundaries around me. And the climax settled not in a courtroom moment but in a quiet realization one evening as I walked past the inherited land again, understanding that regardless of the outcome I had reclaimed my voice, and that decision carried both loss and strength intertwined. And while the future remained uncertain and reconciliation felt distant, I accepted that choosing fairness over comfort reshaped my path in ways that could not be undone, leaving me grounded in the knowledge that integrity does not guarantee peace, but it does guarantee self-recognition. And as the case moved forward and the family narrative adjusted around my refusal to disappear, I knew the consequences would continue unfolding. Yet the pivotal choice had already been made, and for the first time since the betrayal began, I felt aligned with myself, prepared to face whatever resolution awaited without surrendering who I was. As everything settled and the legal process reached a negotiated resolution that restored my documented share of the uprooted land, I finally had space to reflect on what the experience reshaped inside me, because the outcome mattered less than the clarity it forced into my life, teaching me that trust without accountability is not loyalty but risk, and that responsibility to oneself must exist alongside responsibility to family. And I learned that silence can feel peaceful while quietly erasing you, whereas boundaries feel uncomfortable but protect your future. And when I look back at the early days, I see a woman who believed love required endurance and patience above all else. Yet now I understand that self-respect is not betrayal and fairness is not cruelty, and my relationship with Aaron changed permanently, becoming distant but honest, stripped of pretense and expectation. And while that loss still carries sadness, it no longer carries confusion. And Linda faded from my daily thoughts entirely, no longer a source of anxiety or power, just a reminder of how ambition without ethics damages everyone involved. And professionally, I continued to grow with a steadier sense of confidence, no longer hesitating to speak when decisions affected me. And emotionally, I rebuilt trust slowly through friendships that proved support does not demand silence. And standing on the land one last time after everything concluded, I felt closure not because I won something tangible but because I reclaimed authorship of my own story, and I realized that inheritance is not just property passed down but patterns passed forward. And choosing to challenge injustice interrupted a cycle that had quietly harmed others before me. And the lesson that remains strongest is that fairness requires participation and courage, not hope alone, and that love survives honesty better than resentment. And now when people ask how I endured the conflict, I tell them that endurance came from choosing clarity over comfort. And as I share this story, I leave you with a question worth sitting with quietly. What choice would you make if protecting your future meant disappointing people you love? Because the answer defines not only your outcome but the version of yourself you live with afterward. And for me, that answer brought peace. Not perfect or painless, but real. And that is how this chapter ends.